Marine reacts to SCP-001, also known as the Scarlet King, by the Exploring series. Now, we have done a SCP-001 reaction before, and that was with the Gate Guardian, but there's multiple different SCP-001s. I've heard that this SCP is supposed to be kind of one of the more stronger ones, and very, very world-ending. I'm also thinking about creating a playlist where I'm going to be putting all the SCP-001s, just so you can kind of have them all in one little section. And I kind of know a few people have really asked if I'm still taking requests as to what videos I'm going to be watching. I'm always going to be taking requests. Just know that it's about 3 pages long worth of SCPs. So I will get through each and every one of them. It's just going to take a little bit of time. So don't forget to hit that like button. Subscribe. It really does help me out a lot. Hit that notification bell right there. That way you get notified every time I do upload. Sometimes I upload them twice a day. And usually working on them in the mornings. And then releasing them in the late afternoon or late evening. That way when you all get off work, you can enjoy them at your leisure. So without further ado, let's go ahead and see what SCP-001 or the Scarlet King is all about.
The Scarlet King. Extraterrestrial and extra-dimensional threats border on the commonplace in the SCP universe, and the SCP Foundation spends a great amount of time, effort, and resources containing, or at least preventing, these threats from wiping out our existence. There are entities within the SCP universe that we would liken to gods, some of them contained by the Foundation, and some of them not. But one of the most mysterious and potentially world-threatening is the Scarlet King. The Scarlet King is one of the older concepts on the SCP Wiki, but is one largely wrapped up in an air of mystery, with hints of his true nature spread across the site. Due to the lack of canon within the SCP universe, ultimately the Scarlet King is whatever you believe him to be, but I'll go over some of the myths and perspectives related to this eldritch figure. To begin with, we have to go back to where it started, with SCP-231. On the surface, SCP-231 is a young girl, designated 231-7, who is pregnant with some sort of entity. Her and 6 other young girls were found in a police raid on an organization that called itself the Children of the Scarlet King. Each of the girls were pregnant, and 24 hours after the raid, one of the girls went into labor, giving birth to something unknown, which caused hundreds of casualties. The Foundation took over, containing the other 6 girls, but despite their best efforts, each of them expelled increasingly dangerous and horrific entities, the girls dying in the process. Now, only SCP-231-7 remains, and it's the Foundation's belief that if she ever gives birth to whatever's inside of her, it would result in the end of the world. Thus, they instituted daily administrations of Procedure 110 Montauk, believed to be one of the most horrific and cruel processes the Foundation has ever concocted. What it actually is largely a complete mystery, but there are some clues in the documentation. The procedure is performed only by D-Class personnel, but specifically non-violent criminals to avoid any of them accidentally killing 231-7. The girl has to be awake and aware of the procedure, and other personnel assigned to the project are routinely swapped out due to the psychological stress.
Okay, just a couple questions. So, why does she have to be awake? 2, the girls who did give birth, did they give birth to SCPs that we know right now? Like, for example, if one of them gave birth, and I'm just using this for an example, one of them gave birth and ended up being like 682, right? Like, are one of those children some of the SCPs that we know now?
Many of them given memory-wiping amnestics to forget what they've witnessed. Additionally, 231-7's memory is also routinely wiped in order to prevent her from becoming accustomed to the procedure, as it seems it must be continually horrifying in order to prevent labor. A great amount of discussion has gone on about Procedure 110 Montauk, but ultimately it's left up to your darkest imagination. A popular tale, Fear Alone, describes a researcher newly transferred to SCP-231, and discovers that Procedure 110 Montauk is not some brutal action inflicted on a child, but is instead a D-Class reading a bedtime story to a young girl. The researcher is perplexed, but another doctor reveals that they had carried out horrible actions on the other girls, but it ultimately failed. They instead realized that more important than doing the actions was people believing the actions were being done. The old gods, in this case the Scarlet King, cannot see our reality the same way that we can, so they cannot witness the actions done to SCP-231, but the Scarlet King can sense fear. If enough people believe that Procedure 110 Montauk is some monstrous crime done to a child, the fear carried by those people will satiate the Scarlet King. Again, there's no canon, so you can accept this perspective or not.
Okay, then. Oh, damn, scary. Okay, so I was assuming they were like torturing this girl, but obviously they said that they're just reading her book, and that the Scarlet King can sense fear. So if people think that what's going on in there is torture, essentially, then that's enough for him. And then that way they don't have to hurt the girl, but everyone else, the fact that they have this fear that this is what these D-class personnel are doing, that's enough for the Scarlet King to kind of just stay chilling, in a sense, from what I'm getting.
Another tale, New Job, gives a slightly different perspective on 231 and their offspring. This tale describes how, when the Foundation first secured the pregnant girls, they also recovered some notebooks written by the priests of the cult of the Scarlet King. These writings made it clear that if all 7 girls gave birth, some sort of apocalypse would occur, presumably involving the Scarlet King. Additionally, the writings also contain detailed instructions on how to carry out Procedure 110 Montauk, which is the only way to prevent a birth. The Foundation found this suspiciously convenient, as a cult hell-bent on bringing about this apocalypse would have no reason to possess a ritual to prevent it. Further research on the Foundation's part led them to believe that these girls were connected to the 7 brides of the Scarlet King, and that the 7th girl was not like the rest. Rather than giving birth to monsters like the other brides, the 7th gave birth to heroes opposed to the king. The O5 Council ultimately decided to accept this belief, and allowed SCP-231-7 to give birth. The result was SCP-999.
That is adorable. I have seen this SCP, though. I haven't heard too much about it. All I know is that it's supposed to give you, like, a euphoria, or, like, make you feel really good. And I remember hearing that somebody actually killed themselves after being exposed to them because it felt like everything else in the world was kind of a letdown, so...
SCP-999 can generally be considered one of the nicest and most benevolent of these sentient SCPs. An amorphous mass of gelatinous slime that playfully bounces around to give hugs to people, especially those that are unhappy or hurt. Contact with SCP-999 causes an immediate euphoria capable of curing even the most crippling depression, and SCP-999 will also risk itself to protect or rescue others. The tale explains that SCP-999 is the only entity capable of overthrowing the Scarlet King, although it is currently only a child and will need time to grow to its full strength. The myth of Procedure 110 Montauk is perpetuated in order to fool the cult of the Scarlet King into thinking the Foundation is playing into their hands. But eventually, a battle will commence between 999 and the Scarlet King. If you believe this tale, at least. But these SCPs and tales don't really give us a good idea of what the Scarlet King is. For a decent perspective, we can look at the tale titled Dust and Blood. The story speaks of the earliest times when the Elder Gods were first formed out of the darkness. One of these was named Karak, and he differed from the others by being cursed with awareness of his existence, and existence was pain. Angered by this awareness of pain, Karak decided that it would be better if he didn't exist, and more so, if nothing existed. Karak began feeding on the other gods, growing greater and stronger as he consumed them, but so did his pain and hate grow stronger as well. In time, Karak consumed or subjugated all the Elder Gods that didn't flee from him, and he became king of the darkness below. The area beyond his kingdom, the worlds of creation, went to war with Karak and his servants, which still continues to this day. Karak took a wife, becoming known as the Scarlet King in the process, and had 7 daughters with her. These 7 daughters became his 7 brides, and he placed 7 seals on them so that they would never die. These brides had children of their own, monstrous creations that served the Scarlet King. The tale implies that SCP-682, one of the most dangerous and fearsome entities held by the Foundation, is a child of the 4th bride.
Didn't I just say this as well? I mean, mine was more of an example, but you know. It's good to explain why 682 is insanely OP.
Differing from the rest, however, the 7th bride was not utterly broken by the Scarlet King, and instead gave birth to heroes that walked on 2 legs and fought to overthrow the Scarlet King. Ultimately, however, the Scarlet King and his servants have continued their conquests, defeating any challengers, and will presumably one day destroy all of creation. When We Came Home, written by the same author as Dust and Blood, tells of the final battle against the Scarlet King, when 7 warriors carrying 7 sacred spears managed to kill the king and cast his body back into the abyss, restoring creation in the process. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention SCP-231-7, an entity that many perceive to be at the very least related to the Scarlet King. The author of the skip, Dr. Clef, has said that it was not written to be related to the Scarlet King, merely reminiscent of it and SCP-231, but it's open enough for people to choose to believe what they wish. SCP-231-7 is a massive, primeval entity located in an alternate universe, and known to be a devourer of worlds. This entity was a grave threat, and was finally captured by an order of mystics, who crafted 7 chains from the bones and sinews of the Devourer's 7th bride. 6 of these chains are currently broken, with the 7th likely to break within the next few decades. The Foundation has no means of fixing the chains, and no means of preventing the Devourer from entering our world once freed. A fake ritual was created by the Foundation leadership in order to suppress fears that they cannot contain the entity. This ritual incorporates various religious elements as well as phrases related to the Scarlet King. As this ritual is fabricated, there's no real evidence that 231-7 has any connection to the Scarlet King, but a popular theory connects the 7 chains to the 7 girls from SCP-231, and when the 7th girl gives birth, the final chain will be broken. Finally, there is Tufto's proposal for SCP-001, titled The Scarlet King. The proposal describes the King as a largely unknown entity that exists in a number of dimensions simultaneously, but for whatever reason is unable to enter the prime dimension, that is, our dimension.
So it seems like there's many different takes as to what and how the Scarlet King is or was. If that makes sense. I don't know if that made sense, but...
The Foundation believes that the Scarlet King has been attempting to break into our dimension for hundreds of years, and if it ever succeeds, will cause a drastic alteration of reality or eradication of human life. Despite this threat, however, the Scarlet King is given the object class of safe, and the description states that containment is unnecessary. The reason for this, of course, forms the bulk of the proposal, and is a bit more complicated than an average skip. The proposal also mentions SCP-231-7, and that high-ranking personnel are to be informed that it is in fact the Scarlet King, although the truth of that statement is unknown and likely dubious. The remainder of the proposal consists of a large number of lengthy documents and interviews, and I won't take up time going through them individually. To summarize, the proposal is focused around Dr. Robert Montauk, the project lead on SCP-231, 231-7, and the Scarlet King. Montauk has been working on studying the Scarlet King for decades, and has come no closer to truly understanding what it is. Montauk begins interviewing the leader of the cult that the SCP-231 girls come from, who turns out to be a fairly cryptic individual. One notable thing he mentions, however, is that there are 3 laws which must be understood in order to understand the Scarlet King. The law of blood, the law of concrete, and the law of howling. The law of blood was enacted by the Scarlet King, and it represents his rule, filled with hatred, cruelty, and an iron will. It is the old way of things, armies of slaves, blood rights, and chaos amidst order. The law of concrete is the inverse, modern civilization, where everything must be studied and understood so that it can be described, categorized, and filed away. The law of howling is the tension and clashing between these two opposites, and it is here that the Scarlet King takes form. The Scarlet King is ultimately an idea, but the tension between the pre-modern and the modern, the difference between the accepted and the understood, is what allows him to exist. Perhaps most interestingly is that the SCP Foundation itself is what caused this to happen, as the Foundation's drive to understand and categorize everything, in this case the Scarlet King, created the tension between what was previously just accepted, and so they created the Scarlet King.
If somebody could comment what he meant by that, because that just kind of flew right over my head. I can't even really explain what I think they were trying to say. That they created SCP, accidentally created the Scarlet King. You know what? I don't even know. I thought this was just going to be like some kind of monster, and this like, hey, this is what he can do. This is why we shouldn't let him into our universe or dimension. So if somebody could comment kind of what they meant by that, I'd really, really, really appreciate it.
If SCP-231-7 gave birth, it would allow the Scarlet King to enter our dimension, and so Procedure 110 Montauk exists. Interestingly, the specifics of the procedure don't actually matter, so much as the fact that the procedure was created not out of scientific understanding, but out of hate and rage from Dr. Montauk. Dr. Montauk believed that the Scarlet King had taken his brother from him, and so he devised the procedure specifically to hurt the king, and that's why it works, because it follows the law of blood and not the law of concrete. The lessening of tension between the two prevents 231-7 from giving birth, and so the SCP Foundation has decided to change the classification of the Scarlet King to safe, and attempt to not worry as much about understanding and classifying the entity. In a twist on standard operating procedures, not understanding this anomaly is actually safer than understanding it. Ultimately, however, Dr. Montauk leaves the Foundation and joins the cult of the Scarlet King, as he saw the Foundation as a group of hollow men lacking a path, and he would rather take the wrong path than no path at all. If this proposal sounds complicated, that's because, well, it is, and it's likely I've misinterpreted some part of it, so I suggest reading it for yourself. So, none of this really explains what the Scarlet King looks like, or how he'll devour our world or dimension. But that,
which is literally everything that I wanted to know, and I thought I was going to get from this, but, you know.
That's part of the point. The mystery and ambiguity of a terrible, godlike entity goes back to Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos, and the Scarlet King is no different. Whether you think the Scarlet King is a human-like crimson entity, a massive whale, or something less tangible like an idea, the point remains that the Scarlet King is something deeply opposed to our current existence.
Alright, let's talk about that for just a quick minute. So, this is definitely different than from what I thought I was expecting to see. I was expecting to see some kind of monster, some kind of what he kind of wants. Maybe not, though, because, I mean, I know how they like to let you draw your own conclusions and kind of see, like, just in general, maybe kind of get an idea how he looked like. I mean, besides seeing the pictures. But a lot of that wasn't really there. I mean, it's a lot more of, they were saying that it's best to not even try to understand it than try to understand it. I mean, hell, you got the dude, forgot his name, but he went to go join the actual cult that, I forgot what they were called. The Scarlet King's children, or whatever, or the children of the Scarlet King. But I don't know what it is with these SCP. These recent ones, it's been so hard to try to get my head around it. And I don't know, it's because I should be seeing some other videos first before I see these videos and whatnot, back and forth. But from what I did get, that was pretty interesting, was that when one of the old gods, in this case Scarlet King or Mach 2 or something like that, either way, he had like little spidery legs, where he mentioned that he was cursed with self-awareness. I mean, he felt pain, he didn't like it, and feel like that everything else should be the same as far as like, so I mean, I'm assuming that they don't feel pain, so he started devouring other gods. Some ran away, and then when he learned about us and our universe, he immediately didn't like us, just because he's like, I want to make sure that, I get the feeling like he's trying to make it so that no one feels pain, I guess, and then that's why he tries to kill everybody. I don't know. I mean, if someone can comment and try to clear that up for me, I'd really appreciate it. And I had thrown out that 682 as being one of the babies from one of the brides, just kind of as an example. And it might have had some validity to it. So that was pretty interesting. And also, real quick, I just like the fact that, I mean, I like and dislike the fact that everything is insanely complicated. Especially with these SCPs recently. I mean, like, because I feel like, on the one hand, I like when things get a little confusing. That way it kind of really makes you think, it makes you want to go back and re-see it. And it also kind of, at least for me, because I feel like everyone goes in, or like the majority of the people who don't know too much about the SCP and the Foundation and all that, is that when they say, like a basic thing you can say when you're introducing them, and say, hey, just think about an agency that hunts monsters, or like anything that's weird or anomalous, right? And I feel like whenever they would hear that, I feel like they would go, okay, and they're picturing a monster in their head, and then they're picturing like a name to a face, right? But that's not how it is with the SCP Foundation or just the universe in general. Just because, I mean, hell, it could be something as small as a pill bottle that had, I forgot how many pills they said it had in it, but it could cure any disease. There's with the SCP video from yesterday, when they talked about believing in 2718, I believe it was, you would go to this afterlife, and then, or sometimes it's even just an idea, sometimes it's just an article, and then I feel like that's what ends up really giving you that chance to like re-go through these things, and it really makes you want to like re-go through a lot of these videos to kind of see what you missed maybe the first time, and then maybe this time you got questions, and now you got a better theory here, and maybe you got some evidence. And I'm really liking that, how a lot of these SCPs, it seems like they're starting to very, I mean, I understand that nothing is canon, and that everything is just kind of like from a variety of people, and I'm really liking though that everything is kind of coming together. Like you're seeing the interaction between the SCPs, and they start talking, and all of a sudden they're gonna give you some information that you probably wouldn't have heard if you were just watching the singular SCP by themselves. So that's gonna go ahead and do it for this video. I feel like I've gone in long enough. If you're curious to see what videos are going to be coming up next, go ahead and check the description. You'll see the next 5 videos there. And also, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, really does help me out a lot. Dislike if you didn't like it, really helps me improve the channel. Hit that notification bell, make sure it's on, so that way you get notified every time I do upload. And until then, I'll go ahead and see you all in the next video.